Hello, my name is Anne-Marie Brooks, and I'm presenting my mind map on the lecture, A Summary of Our Reading-Based Knowledge. I'll start with my light bulb in the middle. I started with this symbol because the ideas that we teach today are based on these ideas that we read about and heard about. Light bulbs often represent ideas, so I used it as my center. I broke my mind map into periods throughout history. Sequencing ideas is always very useful for me. I began by grouping together the early 1900s. I put a fire at the center because this was the beginning flame of what became a burning need to understand the best techniques and strategies to teach reading. I put the flower over here to represent the belief that teaching reading was the same as appreciating literature. I then put pictures of students both silently reading and orally reading to represent the research of Charles Hubbard Judd, William Gray, Francis Parker, and Ernest Horn. I also put a math book here to represent the research of Edward Thorndike, who said reading was a procedure. He believed reading a paragraph was the same as solving math problems. Off this branch is my organization I studied, the National Council of Teachers of English. They were founded in 1911 to examine college readiness exams. As they continued on, they became a council to help individual teachers and local organizations become effective teachers. My next branch is the 1930s through the 1950s. I put the Basel Anthology there, since it was the foundation for workbooks and teachers' guides in the future. I also put the Dick and Jane Reader, since that was often used during the 1940s. Attached to that, I put a robin, since round-robin reading was often included, an airplane control tower, since vocabulary was very controlled during this time, and cursive writing, since that was considered enough writing instruction during that time. I also then put a drill to represent the 1950s research of Flesch, who stated reading should be practiced like a drill. I then moved on to the 1960s, and I started with a window. This represents Kenneth Goodman's idea of using miscues readers make as windows into their comprehension. I also put a director because there was a much more directed reading activity in this time, before, during, and after reading activities began to be used, with the teacher taking an active role as represented by the apple. It also focused on monitoring your own reading, which is represented by the brain. I put a picture of children growing on books to represent Charles' reading principles, which were part of a series of instruction. In the 1970s, they had some very interesting research as well. Paulo Freire said that reading in schools can play a part in social equality, and so I used a picture of one of the more famous leaders in equality, Martin Luther King Jr. I also put a picture of the sun because it was said that reading should be student-centered and all learning should revolve around that. I also put a beach to represent Goldman's theory that reading is a natural process. I combined the 1980s and 1990s and put a peace sign because this is when the reading wars were ending. I put a picture of a whole book and then a picture of random words to represent the balance between phonics and whole language. I then separated the Reading Excellence program and put adults reading to symbolize that all children should be taught to read and should be prepared for college or career when they graduate school. I also put beakers because this legislation was all evidence-based. Finally, I went to the National Reading Panel. I divided it into 4 components: phonics, reading fluency or speed, comprehension, and vocabulary. I then brought all of these back to the opening of a book to represent how, when combined, these skills create a literate person. I hope you enjoyed listening to my mind map, and it certainly helped me understand and comprehend the lecture.